Hello, I'm Earl Wilson. Today I'm going to share with you another topic that I think is important in going upward and outward as we try to deal with the impact of sexual addiction in our lives. The term denial or he's in denial or she's in denial has really become synonymous with our discussion of addictions. We often say, well, he or she's in denial. And all that really means is the person has not accepted the fact or will not admit the fact that they are under the control of something else, whether it's a substance or behavior, they're under control. And normally that involves some form of chemical interaction, whether it's hormones or adrenaline or whether it's the substance that are found in drugs or other thing. But the key issue is that when something is brought to your attention, if you're in denial, you're going to do one of two things. You're either going to say that's not true and just totally dismiss it, or you're going to minimize it. And obviously those outcomes, if a person is actually involved in a self-destructive behavior, either one of those outcomes or those approaches aren't going to work. If you are involved in a self-destructive behavior and you say, I'm not doing that, then you're going to lose. Or if you're involved in something that's destructive and you say, well, that's really not going to hurt anyone, or I don't do that very much. In experiencing my own denial, I started out by confessing only what there was evidence to prove. So I would say, yes, I had an affair with a former client. If someone had said, what about these other things? What about your involvement with pornography and prostitution? I would say, well, no. I was involved in a little sexual stuff. In other words, a whole world of sin was constricted and forced into this denial package that says just a little. And the other aspect of denial that I think is that you deny the impact of it. Even after a person admits, well, I've been doing this behavior, then they say, but it isn't really hurting anything. Typical denial statement is, I can take it or leave it, I can stop it if I want to, and so forth. So there's part of denial is the denial of being out of control. And we like to believe that we're in control, that we have carefully and successfully taken charge of all aspects of our life. But when people challenge you and begin to say, what about this, what about that, then we begin to realize that this isn't true. Or at least you need to realize that it isn't true. I had a young woman client years and years ago who was struggling with alcoholism. And she said, well, I drink a little bit, and sometimes people tell me that's a bad thing. And so I said, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we just have you this weekend keep track of how much you drink? And so she said, okay. And she came back the next week and she said, I feel really good. And I said, oh, tell me about it. And she said, well, I feel really good. I only had 4 beers. And I said, 4 beers? Oh, well, I suppose in terms of your pattern, what was that like? Well, later on I found out that 4 beers were quarts. Each one was a quart. And I said, well, you kind of deceived me because I'm naive enough to think that a beer is a 16 ounce or whatever, and you're telling me you had a whole quart, 4 of those. She said, well, yeah. So that was some of the denial that she had to get through. So the denial can be about the behavior or about the impact. And typically, when I was working with clients, I would see them have denial in both of those areas. They would, first of all, deny what they were doing well, I have messed around a little bit, or I occasionally go on the internet, and you find out that the occasional might be every night for 6 hours. And you think, oh, that they're not really looking at the whole picture. They're not really looking at that chunk that is taking out of their life. And so to work through the denial is important. And I think that part of it, what I found helpful with people is let's just keep track of it for a while. Let's just see what's actually going on. And so if you keep track of whether it's your use of pornography or you keep track of any kind of habit that you're trying to change for a period of time, then you'll get a bigger picture of how much it's affecting you. And then you still reach the point where you have to say, do I want to do something about this? Now, typically people don't admit that their desires have the control over them that they do, and that they have been avoiding certain things and not really acting like it doesn't exist. They deny it hurting themselves. They deny it hurting other people. I often ask people the question, what impact has your choices had on other people? What impacts it had on your wife? What impacts it had on your children? How's it impacted the church and so forth if they're involved in church? And what I will often find is that they'll say, well, it hasn't had any impact. Well, I know good and well that if it hasn't had any impact, or they think it hasn't had any impact, then that means that they haven't told, or that they believe that no one knows. And rarely do people not know. When I ask a father if he's spoken to his son about the fact that he uses pornography, he said, my son doesn't know. Well, it wasn't too much longer than that, and the son comes in and said, about a year ago I found my father's stash of porn, and he thinks I don't know, but I know. So dealing with denial is really getting back to the realities of your life, what you're doing, and then really taking a careful account of the way it's impacting other people. It's what AA calls a fearless inventory. So one man I asked, well, how is this impacting your children? And he said, it hasn't bothered them. And I said, okay, I shouldn't be arguing with you. And I started to argue with him, and I stopped and apologized. And I said, but will you do this? Will you email each of your children and ask them if your choices have hurt them? And he came back the next week and he said, I owe you an apology. I only heard from 2 of my children, but they've been hurt very deeply. And that tells me I need to stop telling myself that I'm not hurting anyone, and I need to take this more seriously. And that's what I suggest to you is, and I constantly remind myself of, denying the realities of what you're doing and the impact it has on other people never allows you to grow. It only keeps you imprisoned in your own view of what you would like your life to be, but it's not reality based. And so I really recommend to people all the time that they tell it like it is, that they learn to evaluate not only the full extent of what they're doing, but also the impact it has on others. And to me, the more I can deal with my own denial, the more free I am to make good choices in my life.